how it was planned, but that's how it worked out. Live with it. What we're going to do this time is to have each of the candidates have an opportunity to introduce themselves standing here at the podium. You get 5 minutes for that, and candidates, with all due respect, we're going to limit you to the 5 minutes. There's a young lady down here that has flashcards that will tell you when you're down to a minute and then 30 seconds, and then she'll give you a time's up card. And there's a Doberman right behind here that has, there's a phone in this podium, and he goes for that. You've got to get out of the way in time. After that, though, we will be opening it up for questions again. Last week, there were good, important questions, and again, candidates, we are going to limit you to 1 minute per person to answer the questions. Last week, as it turned out, we had everybody in the panel got an opportunity to answer a question. That seemed to work out pretty well. So we'll do the same thing, but we do want to limit you again to the 1 minute so that we can get lots of questions in. Again, these are the guys that are hanging out there. Their personal lives are up for grabs, their careers, what they've done. These are the people who are making the system work, who believe in the system, political efficacy and all that. I want you guys to give these guys a big welcome and listen to them.
Someone who can get our people back to work, and someone who will stand up strong for public education in this country. You know, we've got 30 million people in this country right now that aren't working enough hours to make ends meet for themselves or their family. And putting those people back to work begins with two things. The first is that we have to have the best skilled, most ready workforce that you can find anywhere on earth. This last year, I did something about that in Oregon by bringing together a very diverse coalition, including the Democrats and the Republicans together, helped pass the bill in Salem that next year will begin restoring shop classes to all of the middle schools and high schools in the state of Oregon. Now, you here at Westview have got shop classes, but you know not every high school does, and I challenge anybody to find me a middle school anywhere in the state that does. But next year, with brand new money for public education, at least 10 middle schools and high schools will see fully restored career education programs. Second, I'm proposing a 21st century jobs program that will get people back to work, rebuilding the bridges and the roads, the airports and the seaports. We should be retrofitting our buildings with green technology, and let's start with a new smart electrical grid for the country that can accommodate the emerging renewable energy industry. You know, I've spent my career here in Northwest Oregon as a civil rights lawyer, standing up for people who had suffered injustice or been discriminated against. In fact, my wife Debbie and I both grew up just a few miles from Westview High School. We met at Alola High School when we were just 16 years old in civics class. Was that a true lover of civics class or high school sweethearts? I don't know which. And we raised our son Nathan and our daughter Claire, and some of you remember Claire, who graduated from Westview High School last year. You then sent me to the State House and to the State Senate, where I had the unique ability to bring diverse groups together to pass things like the Oregon Renewable Energy Act, which has made Oregon a national leader in green jobs and put us on a pathway to good, clean energy, the first expansion of Oregon's bottle bill in nearly 40 years, and the bill that ended discrimination based on sexual orientation in the state of Oregon. And I've always stood up for public education by making the highest proposals in our state legislature for school funding, for working to eliminate unnecessary standardized testing by pushing for a repeal to the No Child Left Behind Act, and by bringing music and art and physical education and those shop classes back into the school curriculum, and by eliminating fees. You know, you all don't know this, but there was a day in the Beaverton School District where you didn't have to pay to play on a sports team or sing in a choir. It was a free and equally accessible school system. And I've pushed for that again at the state level, and I will be pushing it for you at Congress. And it's for those reasons that I am the only person in this race, Democrat or Republican, that is supported by Oregon's teachers. So I want to thank you, Westview, one more time for having this great public discussion here, and let you know that you can Facebook me and the campaign, or look us up at bradavakian.com, where you can sign up to be a volunteer and help with the campaign. And certainly make sure that all of you are registered to vote. The 18th is the deadline, and ballots go out on the 21st, and I want every single one of you to be participating. Thanks again for having us out today.
First things first, congratulations on a fantastic win last Friday night against Beaverton. Some of you I'm sure are happy about that. Some of you probably didn't know it occurred. My name is Rob Cornilles. I'm a resident of Tualatin. Actually, I have 3 sons, all who've gone through the Tiger Tualatin School District. Many times we've been your rivals, but today I'm here as a friend to talk about things I think are important to you. They're certainly important to your parents, to your teachers, and things that are important to me as well. Let me give you a little bit about my background, because we'll have plenty of time here to talk about issues. I'm a native of this area. I was born and raised in Washington County, in Yamhill County as well. In fact, speaking of high school sweethearts, my wife Allison and I have been married over 25 years, and we met at Newburgh High School. And yes, you give me that, that's good. And so, boys, there is hope, by the way, if you have someone in mind. But we have 2 boys in college, one still at Tualatin High School. He's a sophomore. His name is Chad. I want to share with you a quick story about Chad. By the way, his name is spelled C-H-A-D-D. The second D is silent. And Chad and I were sitting on the couch about 2.5 years ago watching a television show. And I was not running for office at the time. And it was about the rising debt that our country is experiencing right now. In other words, how we're spending more money than we're bringing in. And it was a pretty sobering news story. And I didn't really think Chad, who was 12 at the time, was really paying much attention until it went to a commercial. And then he looks over at me and he says, "Dad?" And I said, "Yeah, what's up, Chad?" He said, "Dad," pointing at the TV, "am I going to have to pay for all that someday?" And I said, "Well, as a matter of fact, Chad, you are. Because the adults of today are not acting like grown-ups. In other words, the actions of today's adults are causing tomorrow's adults to have to take on a burden that you didn't ask for. And if you understood it, you probably would be a lot more involved and active in what's going on in politics today." And that's what caused me to get involved. The serious look on my son's face that day drove me to make a decision. The decision was, as much as I like doing what I do for a living, as much as I like spending time with my family and friends, as much as I like volunteering in my community, I have to do more. It's not enough. And so I decided to run for Congress. And last year I was the Republican nominee who ran against David Wu. And this year, it's do-over time. And I'm very excited about that, because I want to tell you students that the problems that we had 2.5 years ago when Chad and I spoke have not gone away. In fact, they've only gotten worse. Sobering statistic, right now there's a deficit that our country is running in 2011. A deficit means that we're spending more money than we're taking in as a country through tax revenue. The deficit for this year, 2011, is projected to be $1.3 trillion. Just to give you an idea how much money that is, That's almost $4,300 per person, man, woman, and child in the United States, just this year alone. If you add on top of that the debt that we've already incurred because we're spending more than we're taking in, every man, woman, and child in America right now has an obligation of nearly $45,000 you have to pay back the government. And you haven't even graduated from high school yet. This is a serious situation. And it's something that requires some serious thinking, some real problem solving, not just a bunch of words, not just a bunch of broken promises, not just a bunch of empty action, but it requires real leadership, real sacrifice, and some very tough choices. And so that's why I'm running for Congress. Because in my life, I've learned how to make tough choices. Allison and I started a business out of a spare bedroom in our home 16 years ago in Tualatin. We've turned that business into a leader in our industry. We work in the sports industry. I consult with professional sports teams and college athletic departments all over the world, specifically in North America. Go St. Louis Cardinals. They are my oldest client. And hey, and so we know how to stick to a budget. We know how to pay our employees every month. We know how to not spend more money than we're taking in. And those are the kind of skill sets, that's the kind of background that I think we need more in Congress, because Congress doesn't get it. They're arguing, they're bickering, and they're not coming to real solutions. I look forward, with your help and the help of your parents and the adults, to being your next congressman from the 1st Congressional District. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Cornilles. Now we'll hear from Pavel Governor.
Opportunity to talk, but thank you, student and the teacher who organized this forum. I many times wrote letter to other schools, high school, but they ignored you. I appreciate you pay attention politics. Okay, my name is Pavel Goberman. I originally from former USSR. Take care when you were not born, 1980 for political reasons. Why I came here for freedom. When I met here, so I know this system very well. Why running for office? Because Constitution United States ignored it, violated, but politicians saving this country. What's going with this nation? Ignore it. Oregon State Bar is the bench of a mafia of lawyers and consume money from lawyers. Why I am former immigrant with imperfect English, I came legally. Why I run for office? Because I see violation of Constitution, nobody said about it. Well, you know politics. When United States President, United States Congress appointed United States judges, it is not a violation, it's violation of Constitution, it's not check and balance, it's not divided power, it's violation of Constitution, rape of Constitution. United States judges, attorney must be elected because politicians defend crime over crime because they appointed judges. It's not why you have to pay a future. Okay, now I originally from former society, USSR, like my parents died. You know, very bad grow up without parents. I grew up in orphanage. I recommend you, demand from you, respect your parents, respect them. It's not very good grow up without parents. Okay, I work at for TriMet. I have degree, but I didn't know the system, vote for TriMet, and illegally I spoke. They waste taxpayers' money, they terminated me. 13 years I could not get justice. 13 years. Therefore, I'm pro. I wrote letter to Commissioner Bureau of Labor again to investigate my complaint. Ignorance only. It is official misconduct. It is felony. Okay, now I'm in health fitness business. I'm author and publisher of book with my imperfect English and producer of video named Get Energized. I'm 74, I have no medical problem. Who won competition with me push-up? I do 55 push-ups in 1 minute, I do 9 pull-ups. During swimming, I use butterfly strokes. Now media say about abuse children. You see, it again during politics. I against money in election, and sentence this country. Election vote. Don't vote who advertise. Don't vote. It's selling you. They say about abuse children. Again, during politics, drug company, medical organization, both politicians, if they don't concentrate on prevention. I'm on prevention, therefore I will be elected, I will give to each child jump rope. Prevention, because nation pays so much money on healthcare. Okay, I'm not a politician, could you cheat a little bit? I'm kidding. Okay, I run home because I have planned to create million jobs. I promise terror against our country. I promise in a few months balance national budget. I promise to improve traffic, about car insurance, street robbery, insurance company. Okay. I think you're not politician. Okay, thank you.
Now we'll hear from Jim Greenfield. I'm not going to talk to you about my high school sweetheart or how many push-ups I can do, although I can do quite a few. I'm going to talk to you about the national debt. I know it sounds boring, right? But it's not, and I'll tell you why. The national debt of the United States government is now $15 trillion. It goes up by $4 billion every day. Now that doesn't include another $70 trillion in unfunded liabilities, which the government conveniently doesn't put on the books. That's to pay for Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. So that's about $85 trillion in debt. Now to put this in perspective, suppose your parents make $50,000 a year and they had a debt of $1.5 million. That's about equivalent. You think they could pay it back? No, they couldn't. And the government can't pay back the debt because the government only brings in $2.5 trillion in revenue. Do the math. So what has that got to do with you? What it has to do with you is that that debt burden is what's destroying our economy. You know, we went into a very deep recession 4 years ago. I'm sure you all know that. We're still in it. You know how long the average recession lasts? About 6 to 12 months. This is different. This is the beginning of the decline of America. According to the IMF, in 4 years from now, by the time Barack Obama leaves office, God forbid he's reelected, he's ruling over this people. By the time he leaves office, after his second term, the United States will no longer be the greatest power in the world. China will be. That's according to the IMF. We're going down, they're going up. What does this mean for you? It means you're going to have trouble finding jobs. It means if you do find them, you're being paid less than your parents were paid. It means that you may face decades of economic struggle. Thomas Jefferson. You've all heard of Thomas Jefferson, right? Did you all study the Declaration of Independence? Thomas Jefferson said, "I am for a government vigorously frugal and simple." You know what frugal means? It means you don't spend a lot of money. Do you think our government in Washington is frugal and simple today? It consumes 25% of our nation's wealth. That's the highest level in history. I'm for government vigorously frugal and simple to preserve the people's independence. We must not let our rulers load us with perpetual debt. For this is the tendency of all human governments, till the bulk of society is reduced to be mere automatons of misery, which is what's happening. Then begins indeed the war of all against all. Have you noticed that too? Everybody's turning against each other, groups accusing each other. Then begins indeed the war of all against all. The forehorse of this frightful team is public debt. Taxation follows that, and in its train, wretchedness and oppression. We must not let our rulers load us with perpetual debt. Now notice, he didn't call on the rulers not to load us with perpetual debt, because he knew they would do it. He called on us to stop them from doing it. How do we do that? We elect people to Congress who will say, I'm against it. I'm going to vote to cut the spending, because today the government borrows 40 cents of every dollar it spends. They can't keep doing that. Now, do you think we can tax our way out of it? Some people are saying we need to tax our way out of this by taxing the rich. Guess what? I hate to tell you this, and this is what Obama and the Democrats don't tell you, is that the rich are already taxed higher than anybody else. Tax rates on the rich are twice as high as tax rates on ordinary people. And if you try to raise their taxes further, they don't pay them. They find ways out of it. It doesn't work. You can't solve this problem by raising taxes, because it's not a tax problem, it's a spending problem. So we need to get people in Congress, people like me, Jim Greenfield. For 20 years I've been advocating balancing the budget, limiting government spending, cutting taxes, and letting the free enterprise system create wealth, because the government doesn't create any wealth. All they do is create bureaucracy and spend other people's money. You want wealth, you have to let private companies create it. People like Stephen Jobs and Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg, they're the ones who create the wealth, not the government. My time is up. JimGreenfieldForCongress.com if you want more information.
Thank you, Mr. Greenfield. All right, now we'll hear from Lisa Michaels.
Thank you very much for inviting me here. I really appreciate it. I just want to ask you, I'm going to go out on a big limb here, probably nobody has, but has anybody ever seen me on television when they were bored and they were flipping channels on cable television? Please raise your hand if you have, just maybe 1 or 2 people. Possibly. You might have. Okay. Well, I've been doing 5 hours of television time every cable in this area every week for the last 6 years. And it's on relationships. It's a G-rated relationship show. Maybe that's why you want to watch it. And you're not allowed to say the 3-letter word with the X in it, and I'm not talking about tax. And for years, it was so much fun. My boys go to Valley Catholic, and they just recently graduated, and my son is at the University of Kansas. Aren't you impressed? Isn't he handsome or what? Come on, girls. Anyway, so he's off there doing that. But the boys, it was really a riot, because the boys would be on the headphones, running the cameras, and in the control room. And really, the funniest part of the show was the boys, you know, taking pot shots at Mom while she was on TV doing this relationship show. Topic I don't know very little about. I haven't had a relationship in years, but I like to talk about it once a month, so it's kind of fun. But I also did a show, and have been doing a show for the last 10 years, since I first ran for state legislature in 2000, called Accountability. Anytime I saw an issue that needed to be exposed that was not being reported in the mainstream media, I would report on it, and I would talk about it on my show. And it was a lot of fun. I was standing up here on the stage, and it reminded me of my glory days in junior high, when I first decided I wanted to pursue my passion of being an actress. I entered the speech contest. It was 1976, bicentennial year. And so they had a patriotic speech contest. So I can do my little opening part. Hello. How lucky you are to be an American. I'm just a tourist from Great Britain, and I'd like to tell you what you have in your life. And I went on to talk about all the wonderful things about what makes America great with my really bad English accent. But it was a lot of fun. And so it's exciting to be up here again. You folks out here, you might not have been paying a whole lot of attention to who the congressman is in our district and who's been representing us for the last, I believe, David Wu is a Democrat. We have been represented by Democrats for the last, I don't know, how many years? I think it's been almost 40 years in this district. I want to show you a little something on my iPad here. Check this puppy dog out. See the red numbers, the red lines on there? That is Republican-controlled Congresses. And as you can see, when the Republicans control Congress, the jobs go up. Your parents' friends, you will have more jobs if you have a Republican Congress. Yet, we here in Oregon have continued to elect Democrat congressmen who are liberal, big-spending government people. And we were humiliated. The entire country knew about our congressman, David Wu. We were humiliated by this Democrat congressman. We have to send a message, just like the entire country was humiliated, the state of New York, the Brooklyn area in particular, by the guy named Anthony Weiner. Does anybody remember that Anthony Weiner story? He apparently posted pictures of his namesake on his iPod or on his iPhone or something. Anyway, he got ousted for being humiliated and so he had to leave. So what happened was they sent a message in Brooklyn, who hadn't elected a Republican since the 20s. They sent a message of conservative, Tea Party-oriented, conservative values with electing Bob Turner. And we need to send the same kind of message to Washington, D.C. by electing somebody who's been down for the fight, who's been there for 11 years, fighting and exposing the fraud and the things that are going on in this country so that we can have a conservative, limited government. And that's Lisa Michaels. So please look at my website, lisamichaels.org. And I also am doing a counter Tea Party rally on the highest road in the area, Sylvan Overpass. I call it Let's Take the High Road. And we bring your Stars and Stripes flags, and I'm giving out community service time for those of you that might need to have that. And we're going to be doing it tomorrow at 4 o'clock to 5 o'clock and waiting to 200 people per minute as they drive underneath the Sylvan Overpass. Thank you. I'm Lisa Michaels. Again, that's lisamichaels.org.
Thank you, Ms. Michaels. At this time, we're going to open it up to the audience for questions. Candidates, the microphones at the table are hot, so you'll be able to speak from there. When you have a question, put your hand up. I will call on you, and we would ask you to stand up and speak loudly so the candidates can hear you as well as other members of the audience. So to get us started right down here in the WHS.
So, Michael, I really admire how you have this sympathy of how Obama was during the administration often, and how he is kind of screwing up. But I want to correct you for a moment that while Bush was in the administration in office, he kind of screwed up the American economy with the national debt. Went up by $3 trillion by going to war in Iraq, by invading them deliberately. And I mean, I'm just saying that like Obama, he took in and had to take care of the national debt. We cannot blame him for like increasing the job because the responsibility passed on.
Your question is?
That's a great point. Maybe he should get a seat up here.
Just give us a question.
My question is that like, how are you going to plan on creating jobs in a situation like this?
Okay, well, I didn't get to go over this. I'm glad you asked that. See this little chart? See the blue lines?
Yeah.
Okay, this is when Obama took over. This was when the Democrats were in control of Congress. As soon as they took control of Congress, that's under Bush, last 2 years of Bush's administration, when the economy tanked, the Democrats were in charge of Congress. We need to start paying more attention to who's in control of Congress, because they're the ones who are seriously screwing this up. That's why you need to elect me, Lisa Michaels, a rock solid conservative, to make sure that we stop that and return to building jobs instead of losing jobs like the liberal leaders.
All right, we will allow each of the candidates to respond to the same question. So, Mr. Greenfield, would you like to take? The question was creating jobs. How would you seek to do that?
You know, you're right about Bush. I'm a Republican, but I don't care what somebody's party was. But Bush made horrendous mistakes. Invading Iraq was one of them. And by the way, I was on the radio. I had a radio show in 2002. Every day I was on the air arguing that we invade Iraq, but they never attacked us and they weren't a threat to us. So Bush actually increased, under the Bush administration, over 8 years, the national debt actually increased by $4 trillion, not $3 trillion. It went up by $4 trillion. That was over 8 years. Under 2.5 years of Obama, it's already gone up by $4 trillion. 8 years, 2.5 years. So the Republicans were bad. The Democrats have been worse. So how do you create jobs? You recognize where the jobs come from. Alexander Graham Bell, Thomas Edison, Henry Ford. Do you know how much money they got in grants from the United States government? 0. How much did Stephen Jobs get when he was inventing the desktop computer? 0. The government doesn't create jobs. The private sector creates jobs. And you need to shrink the government so the private sector can grow and grow our economy again.
Great, thank you. Mr. Williams?
First, Cornilles, surprise. How American people brainwashed by this media? Media mafia occupies this country. They hijacked this election process. Take a look, all of this media promote money in election. My point is the person asking about job creation. I have planned to create a few million jobs. You know, a few million jobs. Also, I had no opportunity in high school. Evening I attend, but after I took vacation school 2 years. After 40 years old, I started work. Therefore, my point to prepare a new generation, we must organize more vocational school for children and for boys and girls what they want to select a profession. Also, I have planned, you know, in Oregon, 42,000 non-profit organizations. They revolt this country. They got $78,000 per year. Nothing to put.
Looks like our time's up. Thank you. Mr. Cornilles.
Here in Oregon, for 15 straight years, we've had more people unemployed than the national average. So obviously, whatever we're doing in Oregon is not working. We need to go a new direction. I think it's time that we put someone in this seat, in this congressional seat, who knows something about creating jobs. And I'm the only candidate of all Democrats and Republicans running who can say that I've started a small business in Washington County. We've hired nearly 60 people in the last 16 years, and our business has been responsible for creating nearly 500 jobs around the country. In fact, more than 500 jobs. And we didn't do it by asking for a government handout. We did it by simply giving people the skills necessary so they could go out and compete and find jobs with confidence. I'm concerned about your future, that you have the ability to use your good education and actually turn it into a job. I'll be a congressman and understand what it takes to do that. I'll be your champion to make sure that that's my #1 priority in Congress. Everything we do, I'll ask myself this one question. Does it help people in Oregon create a job? If it doesn't, then it's probably not worth focusing on.
Mr. Buckley.
All right, here's a few real ideas on how you create jobs in this country. The first is we need to have the best skilled workforce that can compete with anybody on the globe. That starts with programs for our youth, which is why I restored the shop classes in Oregon. Let's take that to a national level. The other is this. Recognize that Northwest Oregon has lost 20,000 jobs to China because of imbalanced trade agreements. We need trade agreements that put us on an equal playing field with the rest of the world and keep the jobs right here in America. The other is this. I'm proposing a jobs program to get people to work, rebuilding the infrastructure of the country, because that's the kind of plan that will put millions of people to work. And here's how you're going to pay for it. You're going to end these wars immediately, and you're going to reinvest those billions of dollars into rebuilding the infrastructure of the country and job training programs. You're going to end the Bush tax cuts for the top 2%, and you're going to get rid of these corporate loopholes so that corporations hide their money in offshore accounts without paying their fair share of the taxes.
Thank you very much.
This is directed
said that the Iraq War was responsible for creating our debt. Can you explain how when Clinton, a Democrat, left office, this country had a surplus, and when Bush took office, when Clinton left office, this country had a surplus. When Bush took office, got in the war, he created jobs by having military spending to create jobs, creating military goods, but he also increased the national deficit. He went from a surplus after a Democrat left, we had a Republican, and then now we have a deficit.
Yeah, it's actually complicated, but I didn't say that Bush created the deficit just by the wars. He also spent too much domestically. It's true that when Clinton left office, there was a surplus, but it's also true that Clinton didn't create the surplus until the Republicans took over Congress. And back in the 1990s, Clinton was constantly, you guys weren't even alive, okay? I was reading the newspapers every day, and there were constant stories about the conflict between President Clinton and the Republican Congress, because the Republican Congress was demanding spending cuts, and Clinton was fighting them. He's the luckiest guy in the world. If the Republicans hadn't taken control of Congress, he would have left office with huge deficits also. And when Bush came into office, there was a recession that he inherited from the Clinton administration. But I'm not a defender of Bush. Apparently you didn't get that point. I'm a defender of certain principles, which are limited government, cut government spending, let the free enterprise system that creates the jobs. But all they grow is government jobs. There are 19 million people employed by government now, pushing papers around and redistributing wealth, and they don't create a thing.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Greenfield. Mr. Goldman, you want to respond?
They spend about every day $1 billion every day to buy oil from other countries. 1 billion, you see, it's common sense. Have to drink for own oil, eat gas. I know one company in Utah closed down, gas company. Why? It looks like some terrorism inside of our government. Also, you say about Democrat, Republican. Media created two parties, okay, for all huge monetary benefits. I American, I don't care about Republican or Democrat, I do what's best for Constitution, for people. Thank you.
The question was about the Clinton administration and that era. And you're right, we ran surpluses as a government back in the 90s, the late 90s specifically. I think the point and the lesson that needs to be learned is if we had a Democrat president, a Republican Congress, who actually worked together. We don't have that today in Congress. We have a Democrat president, a Republican Congress, and a Democrat Senate who continually argue, they bicker, they refuse to meet, they refuse to work cooperatively, and they just play games. And as a result, our unemployment continues to be high. Your neighbors, your friends, your relatives can't find work in Oregon. This is the problem. We don't need more people who are career politicians who know how to play all these fancy games. We need people in Congress, just everyday people like myself, who has not been groomed to be in politics, but rather knows how to build a business and hire people. We need that kind of mentality and that kind of skill set in Washington to get back to a cooperative environment.
Thank you.
What was your name that asked that question? Austin? Austin, thanks for asking the question and thanks for making what is really a quite simple and understandable and correct point. The Republicans got us into deep deficits because they borrowed. And at the same time, they spent like crazy on these overseas wars. And it made no sense. But I also think that whether it's Democrat or Republican, we need fiscal responsibility in the country. You mentioned one period of time when the Democrats brought fiscal responsibility, and that can happen again. It was a very good point. Thanks for making it.
Okay, best thing that can happen to a liberal Democrat president is to have a fully Republican Congress, because that's what E.J. Clinton was treated to. He was treated to a they screwed up after the first 2 years of his administration. They spent like drunken sailors, and that's insulting sailors, I don't mean that. But they did, and it increased, and people were furious. So we threw them out wholeheartedly, and both the Senate and the House of Representatives, which was, of course, what we're running for. And so that's why it got better, because the Republicans forced Clinton to actually do things that would actually help the economy and help increase jobs. Now, I am a 911 family member. Tragically, my cousin was blown out of his office in the World Trade Center, so I'm very concerned about making sure we have peace through strength. They were at war with us. We were not at war with Islamic extremists. We need to maintain our safety, and we need to maintain our security. And yes, I think we are finished in Iraq, and we need to come back. And were they all great decisions? No, never is with war. War is ugly business. My family has to be that. Thank you.
Let's go on the aisle here, the young lady, Classes.
Okay, so this is for Mr. Lockheed. So I want to commend you for putting top classes back in high school. That's a big thank you for that. But you did mention career-related learning. So what are your plans to increase STEM education?
I appreciate it. If you couldn't hear the question all the way over here, she was asking what about STEM education. I think that STEM is a part of career education. It's a part of the 21st century shop class. And it's why this last legislative session, when I went down to pass the bill to return career education, that included brand new money for public schools to have first robotics teams in Oregon's public schools. STEM education is an important part of keeping us competitive in the world, but I also want to say it's not the only part. I want music and art and physical education to all be part of the core curriculum from elementary school all the way through. So we need both in our well-rounded education.
Here's a thought for all of you to take home today. If we're going to revitalize this economy, if we're going to make Oregon great again, it's largely up to you. The better educated you are, the more likely we will have companies who want to grow in Oregon and come to Oregon. But if you don't achieve high marks in school, then companies who would hire your friends, yourselves, your parents, would look elsewhere. It's funny to me, when I look at the education system of our country, how most of you, if not all of you, are so much more advanced than your parents and even your teachers when it comes to technology, yet we're not using it enough in the classroom. Rather than bring you all into a classroom and have 30, 35 of you being instructed in front of a teacher who's doing their utmost best, don't get me wrong, but they're not being given the tools to teach you as quickly as you can learn. So what happens after school is over? You go home, you re-engage in the 21st century, you go back to school the next day, you go back to the 20th century learning. We need to upgrade our technology in the classroom, and you'll provide a better education for all of us.
Okay. I have, as I said, I have planned to create a few million jobs. First, we start send money to country where people say death America. We save big money on this. Also about student education. I'm for education, and my point is the student most grant is student loans must be not more than 3% interest, no more. And second, I have other job to create a few million jobs. As you know, student loan. I have a plan, job loan, employment loan. I will disclose it before in the general election.
Thank you.
See this booklet here? This is called the United States Constitution. The word education is not in it. Education is a state and local function, not a federal function, which the federal government hasn't figured out yet. So let me correct a couple of statements that were made by Rob Cornilles, who I'm running against in the Republican primary. Rob says that under President Clinton, the President and Congress got along and worked together. Sorry, Rob, I know you weren't following politics in those days. They did not get along. They bickered and argued. They have always bickered and argued. It's called democracy. Bickering and arguing is not the problem. By way of analogy, suppose you're sitting in a bus, and the bus driver is driving towards the edge of a cliff at 100 miles per hour. And you start arguing with him and say, "Would you stop? You're going to kill us all." And somebody in the back says, "Would you guys just stop bickering?" The problem isn't the bickering. The problem is that he's driving the bus over the cliff. The problem isn't the arguing. The problem is the national debt and an out-of-control government.
Thank you.
You're so right.
My job would be right.
It's my understanding that the test scores nationwide have dropped every year since we've gotten the Department of Education in Washington, D.C. As he said, you're not educated in Washington, D.C. You're educated right here in Beaverton, Oregon. Why do you need some bureaucrats back there in Washington, D.C. telling you how to educate, telling your teachers what to teach you? You're not, guinea pigs in some sort of social experiment to try and educate you and manipulate you into thinking the way the government tells you to think. You're supposed to be here to learn about reading, writing, arithmetic, so that you can be best prepared, so that you can get the best job you possibly can after you've gotten into the best college you can possibly get into, if that's the decision you decide to make. Thank you.
Back up here in the giant sweatshirt.
Basically talk about how, really all I've heard you say is just like, oh, if we have a Republican Congress, we're going to actually get things done. But I've heard very little of what you're actually going to do. And one of the things that you did mention was, like, the Department of Education setting national standards is a bad idea. When every single country that we're competing with, India, China, Russia, Brazil, and all the different emerging economies have national standards, which is why jobs go over there, because they have the most competitive and most intelligent workforce, because they have national standards. Why do you not want to have a Department of Education which ensures that our schools are going to be meeting national standards to make our workers the most competitive people?
Okay, makes lots of wonderful points. The proof is in the pudding, okay? The test scores have gone down. You don't want to have somebody, micromanaging your classroom from Washington, D.C. And the No Child Left Behind thing with, Senator Kennedy and George Bush put in, I don't think it's a good idea. We don't want to teach people to pass tests. I had to yank my kids out of the public school system. I had no way in through middle school. They were both my 8th grade and 7th grade were flunked in 2 classes. We were so desperate to get my son into one of the best schools in town, Valley Catholic. We held him back a year. It was a wonderful thing, and he was well prepared to go to college, unlike many of our neighbors who went and graduated from Southbridge High School. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Vodka, we're going to check it up. Come on down here.
Well, I think you make a really fine point, and the difference between the federal control and the state control is this. The federal government has our money, and they ought to be funneling that money back into local public school districts so that we can create the kind of programs that are good for us right here in Oregon. And that should be the primary job of the federal government. But we don't want them controlling everything that we do in our own public schools. Oregon has a long history of excellent public schools that prepare students for college or for a job, whatever they want. What I want to see is Oregon controlling its own destiny again, just like we've always done.
The federal government, the Department of Education, over the last 30 years has spent, they spend today 4.5 times what they spent 30 years ago when I was in high school. And we're not necessarily getting better results. So what I would propose is we funnel that money back to the states. Because quite frankly, I have more confidence in your teachers, in the administrators in the Beaverton School District, than I do with people 2,800 miles away. And it's not because they're bad people, it's because the local population, the local administrators and teachers know best how to teach you what is important for Oregonians to learn. So that's the point for us, for me, is to let the local governments and the local school districts have more control. And and give your teachers greater resources. I believe that the more successful we have, the more successful the teacher is, obviously the better outcomes we'll have locally. These teachers need support. They don't need some big brother looking over their shoulder from Washington, D.C.
Thank you.
Military, as you know, military complained about 25% students after high school very poor in math and reading. For me, for me surprised how they got diploma. No child left behind. It is so stupid law. Why blame teachers for somebody bad failure in education? I recommend all of you do homework. Now I walk into this school. I see what is pallets here. Very beautiful school. Taxpayers pay for this. Your parents pay for this. They would take advantage. Listen to your children, to your parents. Listen to your teacher. Do homework. Get education now. It will be opening you more doors. Oh, later you will pay for own pocket.
Mr. Greenfield.
Yeah, Rob Cornilles says that we should funnel the money back to the state. Wait, I haven't said anything funny yet. Rob says we should funnel the money back to the states. I say, how about we just don't even take it out of the states in the first place? The federal government's spending, what, about $50 billion a year on education? Has no effect on education. It's money down the toilet. And just to prove the point, back in the dark ages when I was in high school in the 1960s, we didn't have a federal Department of Education. And I hate to tell you guys, our test scores were higher. We spent less money on education, but you guys are smart. We were smarter. I don't never insult your audience. I'm just kidding, but the point is that when you send money to the federal government, they flush half it down the toilet, then they give you half back. It's a total waste. It's a local function. The closer the decisions are made, where the students are, where the parents are, where the teachers are, the better decisions are going to be made. So we need to get rid of the Federal Department of Education. And by the way,